Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to another Reddit Stories video. And in today's video, we will be covering Reddit's Skinwalker Encounters Volume 2, because you guys seem to love the first one so much, and it just did really well, and you guys keep asking for more and more like this one, so here you go. And anyways, I'm just excited to get into it, so welcome to Reddit Skinwalker Encounters. And also, before we get into it fully, please subscribe to the channel, it helps out a ton, and like the video, and yeah, let's get into it. My Skinwalker story. Before I begin, I would like to say this is a very long story. It's been something that's haunted me since I was 6 years old, since my first encounter with it. I've had dreams about this, and 2 very specific encounters with the creature. I'm sharing this story so I could possibly find help on what to do or how to get rid of this creature that's been hunting me since I can remember. Just for background, I'm a 21-year-old female and still worry about this creature finding me, but I'll get into detail why later. For now, here's my story. I would always go camping with my grandparents, who I call Gammy and Gampy, at the end of my school years. I would always look forward to it since I grew up loving the outdoors and the woods. I especially loved camping, loving the idea of having s'mores, taking long hikes, being around the campfire, and of course the wildlife we would see. Now, I grew up in California, mostly near cities, so the forest was like my true home to me. I always preferred being near trees and dirt rather than the buildings and crowded places. Besides, the woods were much quieter and more peaceful. I always felt safe while I was there, like nothing could ever hurt me. But something strange would always happen at the end of the month of May. I would always have this reoccurring dream during the last week of my school year. I would be in the woods, walking alone down a dirt trail. The woods were always strangely quiet. I would continue to walk this path until I saw this red fox poke its head out from behind a tree. Its eyes were always strangely human-like, but they were yellow and somehow looked like a teddy bear eyes. And it would just stare at me. It wouldn't make a sound at all. It would just watch me. Usually in my dream I would go up and pet it. That making the fox finally making a noise, usually a soft growl. Then I would continue walking, and it would follow me. The first time I would have this dream was when I was actually around 5 years old, and it lasted until I was perhaps 11 years old. Over the years, it would be the exact same thing. I would go for a walk in the woods, find this fox, pet it, then continue my hike with it alongside me. But about having this dream for the 4th time, it would start to walk behind me. That's when I started to feel uneasy about this fox. I could hear it making odd noises, but every time I went to look back, it would always just be walking like nothing was wrong, even somehow giving me a smile. Sorry to go about one dream, but I now believe that it was a warning of the creature. Now that the dream is out of the way, I can talk about my first true encounter. I was 6 years old, and I was going on a camping trip with Gammy and Gampy for about a week. Of course, I was very excited for it, being able to barely keep myself in my school seat for the last day of kindergarten. They had picked me up right as the bell had rung, and already had the camping trailer attached to Gampy's truck. I remember he drove an old red truck that only had 3 seats, me always being in the middle. It took about 2 hours to get there, and another good hour to find our usual camping spot. It was deep into the woods and far from other people, as my Gammy wasn't too fond of being around other people while we camped. As they were setting up the camping trailer, I wandered around the campsite, loving to dig in the dirt for bugs. I had sat down on the dirt and started to dig, but I noticed how strangely quiet the woods were. It was never quiet, not even in the dead of night. I thought it was odd, but being only 6, I didn't think too hard about it. As I continued to dig for bugs, however, I thought I heard my Gammy call for me. She'd always call me Sugar Booger, that being a nickname she gave me since I was born. That's what I had heard, but it sounded like she was very far away and somewhat sick. Sugar Booger. I looked up where I heard it come from, that being from the woods, but there was no way she was there because she was still unloading stuff from the truck. Even at age 6, it didn't feel right. So I walked closer to my grandparents and stayed next to them. I soon forgot about my weird encounter though, as we began to have fun. For the rest of the day, we played card games, sat next to the campfire as we ate dinner, and stared up into the stars. I always loved seeing the stars, there never being anywhere I lived at. We started to get sleepy around 9 p.m., I believe, and we started to get ready for bed. There were bunk beds that me and my Gammy would sleep on, keeping our luggage on the top bunk, and we would sleep on the bottom bunk. Due to my Gampy snoring, he would sleep on the couch of the trailer. I would always sleep next to the trailer window just in case I couldn't sleep and wanted to look outside. I fell asleep pretty quickly though, that being the last day of school and all. It was pretty exhausting. I remember waking up many hours later. It was still being pitch black outside. It wasn't weird for me to just wake up late at night since I always have had sleeping issues. I rolled onto my side trying to fall back asleep until I heard Sugar Booger. My eyes immediately shot open as I heard my nickname being spoken, but I knew it wasn't either of my grandparents. They were both fast asleep and never were known to sleep talk before. I started to feel this horrible feeling in my gut, like whatever I was hearing wanted to really hurt me. Even at the age of 6, I knew this wasn't normal. Then I started to hear tapping at the trailer window. It was soft, but loud enough for me to hear it. Tap, tap, tap. I just sat there, frozen in fear. I was trying to just brush it off as tree branches or rain, but I just knew that it wasn't. I could tell that it really was someone or something tapping on the window. Then I decided to be brave and look. Big mistake. I pulled the curtain away to only peek, and all I saw were these large, yellow eyes. They seemed glassy, yet not entirely real. They looked like a giant teddy bear eyes, but cold and unwelcoming. I remember in that moment, I panicked and quickly closed the curtains back up. I then hid under the blanket, that being the only thing I knew to do when I saw a monster. I could feel tears falling down my face. I never had been so terrified in my life. I just curled up into my Grammy's side and clung to her all night long. That damn tapping only getting louder and more persistent throughout the night. I don't remember falling asleep, but somehow I did. I do remember my Gampy waking me up around noon, saying how if I didn't get up quick enough, we could still go fishing. I honestly didn't want to leave the trailer at all, terrified that whatever I saw that night before would be out there. I did eventually go outside, but I was constantly looking around, horrified that whatever saw me last night would get me. My Gammy immediately knew I was scared and pulled me into a hug when she saw me, asking what was wrong. I did tell her what I saw and heard, but surprisingly, she believed me. The next thing I knew, she was telling my Gampy that we were moving campsites. It took a bit to convince him, but he did eventually start to pack up and hook the trailer onto his truck. I was put into the truck so I could properly sleep, but I just couldn't. I kept feeling that I was being watched, thinking that every little noise was that thing I saw, that if I closed my eyes even for a second, it would get me. My Gammy wasn't too far away from me when I heard it again, but this time it was my actual name. Aaliyah! In that moment, I had never seen my Gammy move so fast. She looked up into the bushes where we heard it, then to me. She then got me into the truck with me and pulled me into a tight, protective hug. I began to cry all over again, telling her how I just wanted to go back home. That's when my Gampy got into the truck, and since I was sobbing so hard to the point I was coughing, he agreed we could go home. We started to head out of the campsite, still hurt that this trip had been ruined by something. But I still didn't know that. That's when something in my head told me to look back. I slowly did so, feeling an ice-cold fear wash over me as I saw something. A red fox, sitting in the middle of the campsite, sitting there with large yellow eyes. The same red fox from my dream, somehow curling its lips into an eerie smile. After that encounter, we never did go back to that campsite. We did continue to camp, but in more populated areas. I didn't tell my grandma what I saw, but she had told me to trust my gut. She knew that I was feeling sensitive to certain entities, and that would help me if I trusted it. Now, this would be the end of the story, but I'm afraid it isn't. There was one more encounter I had with a creature. It was much more terrifying than the first time. The second encounter I had when I was 17, many years later. By this time, I knew very well what a skinwalker was now, and I was still very paranoid every time I went near a wooded area. I still worried about seeing that fox, but I never really thought about it too much. Me and my two younger siblings were staying at a relative's house for Christmas, them living way up into a mountain area. I think they were my great aunt and uncle, but I'm not sure. Where they lived, there was no service at all, so unless we hooked up onto their Wi-Fi, we had no phones. I didn't mind the house, still loving the woods no matter what happened. Although at night I hated how they didn't close the window curtains, making it easy for anything outside to see inside. But I did feel safe while inside the house, knowing that they wouldn't let anything hurt us kids. Luckily, it didn't snow where they lived, so we could go outside and run around. They also had this beautiful black lab, being about a year old, named Pam. She was very playful and normally wouldn't listen to anyone but my uncle. Although she was easily excitable, she was a good puppy. One of the days we were there, my little sister and our aunt went out to the store for a nice girls' day. Although I'm a girl, I wanted to go hiking with my uncle and my little brother. We left pretty early since the hike we were doing was 4 hours of walking into town. It was a really chilly morning, but since we were doing so much walking, it felt great. We also decided to take Pam, it being a good way for her to get exercise and have fun. About maybe an hour into our walk, I started to slow down a bit, wanting to enjoy the beautiful forest. It was so peaceful. I could have honestly stayed there. But as we continued to walk, I started to feel something odd. I noticed how quiet the forest had suddenly become, hearing only our footsteps and my brother talking to our uncle. Pam noticed it too, her ears going straight up and growling softly. I started to pick up my pace to go next to my brother, worried that possibly a coyote or mountain lion was nearby. I knew though, they wouldn't be out this time though. Even if they were, they wouldn't walk near the roads. My little brother was only 9 at the time, and being the oldest sibling, my natural instincts to protect him kicked in. Again, that ice-cold fear I once felt when I was 6. I tried so hard to not think of the creature, but it was all I could worry about. I was so scared. I felt like I was back to being that scared little 6-year-old again. I had to stop for a moment though, seeing my shoelace came undone. I quickly kneeled down to tie it back up, trying to hurry and just get out of there. That's when I heard it. Aaliyah. In that moment, my heart dropped to my stomach. My eyes were widened and I could just feel myself start to shake from fear. It was right next to me. I heard it clear as day. I slowly turned my head and there it was. That same red fox, still having those horrid yellow eyes and that same demented smile. Only this time I saw it much more clearly. Its fur looked so matted and disgusting. The smell it had was like rotten, decaying flesh mixed with garbage. Its limbs were much too long for a normal fox, the back legs bending completely the wrong way. Those eyes were still the worst thing about it, but now they looked emptier than I remembered. I wanted to scream, to run, to cry, but I just couldn't. I was frozen as I was, too scared to even blink. Then I heard it speak again. This time, however, it had mimicked my little brother's voice. Found you. Before anything else could happen, Pam suddenly jumped in front of me and started to bark like mad, snapping and growling so aggressively that it scared me out of my frozen trance. When I looked back, it was gone. I used that moment to run over to my brother and my uncle, who didn't see what I saw as they were too far ahead now. But I heard my uncle start to pray and sing a song under his breath, keeping my brother and myself close to him. I was just too scared to even look back, so I just kept my eyes on the ground and refused to stop walking. Pam had stopped barking, but she was still loudly growling and never left my side as we continued our hike. My little brother was a bit worried, but he just thought it was a coyote. When we finally made it up to town, my uncle had called our aunt and told her to pick us up, saying something about how it wasn't safe for us to walk back. Thankfully, she did come and get us, but she was confused since we talked about that hike for days. On the car ride back, Pam never left me alone. She was right beside me the entire time. She knew that thing was after me, and she protected me. I was very grateful that she was with us. Who knows what would have happened if she wasn't. When we got back to the house, I was talking to my uncle and aunt. Once I told them what happened and what I saw, they had started to pray and check that all the locks were shut tight, my aunt putting something around the doors. I now believe it was probably ashes, but I never did find out. Unfortunately, this made our Christmas vacation cut short, as they were worried that I was not safe while still in the woods. We had to be taken home the next day, them making an excuse of how there was an emergency with a friend and that they tried to help them out. I felt horrible that this Christmas was ruined, but once I did leave the woods, I truly felt safe again. Before they had to drive me back home, though, they told me that it wasn't my fault, and that luckily, it didn't hurt me or the other kids. It did make me feel a bit better, but it still brought up a lot of questions and worries. Is it still around? How? Why? What did it want with me? Does it want my skin, my soul? Was it just going to be tormented by this thing forever? I still don't have any answers to these questions, but that's what really scares me. Now I've longed to move from California and now live in Kentucky. I do live in woods, but so far, that thing hasn't found me. I know that seems pretty stupid on my part, but life had changed a lot when I was growing up. I was given no other option to live somewhere else, and my grandpa in Kentucky was kind enough to let me live with him. So please don't call me an idiot for moving to the woods when I had no other choice. Anyways, while I'm happy it hasn't found me, I'm still worried. Can it still find me? Is it still hunting me? I'm not close to anyone who knows truly how to get rid of this thing. And that's why I'm telling my story now, so I could possibly find help. So please, if there's anyone out there who does know, help me. My friend's Skinwalker story. Back in college, a buddy and I were hanging out in our dorm room, smoking some weed and chilling. We got on the topic of creepypastas and stuff, and I mentioned that I've heard some really creepy Skinwalker stories. My buddy gets real quiet out of nowhere and said, "I saw one once. Up close and personal. That shit is real, bro." Of course, I asked him to tell me more. He said he didn't like talking about it, but eventually opened up. So his story took place back in the summer before he left for college. Him and his high school friend group had planned a big last hurrah camping trip. He was from Scottsdale, Arizona, and I think they said they drove a good hour and a half outside the city to one of their friends' parents' ranching properties. That's about 8 people in their group, and everyone shows up around the same time in 3 separate cars. Around when they show up, it's already starting to get dark, so they set up their tents and a campfire and start drinking and smoking. This one dude in their group, let's call him Tim, is being a little bit more quiet than usual. My buddy asks him what's wrong, and he says something like, "I don't feel good. Just a little under the weather today." Regardless, they start making brats and are all having a good time. Then out of nowhere, everyone notices Tim is gone, just totally vanished. Nobody even saw him leave, even though everyone was relatively close to the fire. The group starts calling his name, thinking he's pranking everybody. Then they start to get worried about Tim, as he'd been gone for over an hour. So my friend and a couple others go out into the hills to search for them. They walk around for a good 15 minutes calling his name before they finally get a response. It's not Tim. Instead, they hear the familiar howl of a coyote, and it's answered by a couple other coyotes. My buddy says he was a little bit worried at this point that Tim might have gotten dragged off by some wild animals. Everyone in their friend group is paranoid because there's no way Tim could have gone missing without anyone noticing. Just no way. Then they heard another howl. Suddenly. It's longer than the others, and different in that it sounds off. Like if someone had a recording of a coyote howling and decided to play it. My friend's blood ran cold when the howl ended in a sort of hacking laughter. And unlike the howl, the laughter sounded close, like 20 feet away close. The group starts frantically looking around, convinced Tim is out there fucking with them. He isn't. They don't see anyone. They return to the fire a little shaken up. Everyone is really starting to get worried at this point. The group starts considering calling the police when suddenly a truck pulls up to the campsite. It's Tim's truck. Tim steps out of it and is wondering why everyone has been freaking out. Tim says he's sorry. He got off of work 2 hours late and hurried out to the ranch as fast as he could. This is when the group realizes that Tim didn't carpool there with anyone. As if on cue, they hear another long, drawn-out howl, just like the other one. At that point, the group noped the fuck out of there. They ended up paying to camp in a designated campground, and the night went on as normal. But my friend still says he thinks about when he asked Tim if he was alright. He claims that at the time he could definitely tell something was off about Tim, but didn't think anything of it. But now he's 100% convinced that Tim was some sort of skinwalker entity impersonating his friends for shits and giggles. How the creature knew what Tim looked and sounded like, well, he has no explanation for that. Maybe it just got inside their heads. My wife heard a skinwalker in our house last night. Let me start off by saying that my wife doesn't believe in paranormal entities or anything of that nature. We have 3 cats, and one of them likes to be a rebel, jumping onto counters and meowing at the top of his lungs just looking for attention. He does this throughout the night, and it's a regular occurrence. Last night, after a few beers and video games, I decided it was time to head to bed with my wife. When I woke up this morning, my wife was basically attached to me with wide eyes and a nervous look on her face. I asked her what was wrong, and she proceeded to tell me what happened last night. She said that around 2:50 in the morning, she was woken up by this sound that sounded like one of our cats downstairs meowing unusually loud. After giving herself a few seconds to perk up and fully pay attention, she says that the meow sounded more like a person trying to mimic a cat, and it keeps saying hello. After meowing for 2 to 3 minutes, a loud bang came at our door, and a notification went off that our motion sensor at our front door. When she told me this, I checked the phone, and sure enough, there was a notification for motion detected at 2:52 a.m. I asked her why she didn't wake me up so I could grab the gun. She said she was frozen with fear and didn't want it to hear her make a noise. We're out running errands while I'm typing this, but something made me uncomfortable about her story. Last night I set the home security alarm around 9 p.m., and we didn't turn it off till we walked the dog this morning. To make things worse, we had slept with all the animals in the room, and the door was closed. So whatever was in our house or outside the front door was not one of our animals. Obviously, the first thing that came to my mind was a skinwalker, but maybe I'm just paranoid. I checked all the rooms in the house after I got up. I'm not sure what I could have done anyways. It's very odd that my wife was scared so badly by something she doesn't necessarily believe in. We bought this house, brand new, so no one has lived here before. When I'm home alone, I do feel like I'm being watched or someone's always watching directly behind me. My wife also said that the house has given her chills since we moved in. Something is just off about it. We just got home and I went to hang up one of my shirts in the master bedroom closet when I noticed that the board that covers the attic access has been shifted a little. When I asked my wife about it, she said she's never been up there and the builders would have placed it back in its original place before we made the purchase. I'm genuinely getting anxious just thinking about this. What could be going on? Has anyone had an experience like this? Or similar at least? We're going to my mother-in-law's to get some sage. My wife said burning it to keep whatever's around our house away. My grandfather saw a skinwalker. My grandfather told me a story once as we sat around a campfire in his backyard in the cool night of the Arizona desert. The horizon was clear, and each star twinkled in a purple sky, with a full fat moon hanging low over the mountains. His voice was raspy and gravelly, the result of a lifetime of smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. The fire danced and shined across his wide, dark eyes as he settled into his seat, ready to tell a story. Way back when I was a boy, about your age, he began. I lived outside an Appalachian reservation with your great-grandfather. He returned from the war and set about raising horses and cattle on a 100-acre ranch settled between a brambly mountainside with dirt good for growing thorn bush and not much else. One night my mother was sick, and Pa and I took a trip into town about 50 miles away, straight through a dry desert, over a washed-out creek, and some old abandoned farmsteads. The fire sparked and a log crackled, jolting me out of the story. What next? I asked. Settle down, boy. You'll hear it soon enough. Pa and I were driving in an old Ford pickup truck. I remember it was dark out, inky and thick, with only the lights of our old truck lighting up the road. I remember, too, when the engine began to sputter, and the truck slowed to a jerky stop. God damn it, Pa said, guiding the Ford to the side of the road as it coasted to a halt. Stay here, son, as he stepped out into the darkness, shutting the door with a heavy thud. My window was down, and a cold desert air was breezy and felt good on my hot face and neck. Pa was getting water from the back to cool the engine, and that's when I smelled it. Rotten eggs. Strange, I thought, to smell sulfur in the desert. My nose also picked up carrion, like one of them dead, bloated cattle that would drop dead from the heat and lay there until the crows pecked enough holes in their side to cause the whole thing to explode. It stunk and I gagged. My skin started to tingle too. The back of my neck felt itchy, and my face started to get hot. The wind stopped blowing and hung still and heavy, with the stink filling the cab. Pa, I called. Pa! Pa! No answer. My heart started beating, and I felt such a fear in me, in my bones, in my chest, boy, I tell you. I never felt fear like this, not until Vietnam, not until I saw men dying around me. I locked the door and reached over for my pa's door, and saw a shadow bound across the road, through both dim beams of light, across the partly open domed hood. Grandfather paused. He spit a fat wad of tobacco spit off to his side, and he looked pensively into the darkness. I realized I was holding my breath and I gasped for air. The night was cool, but I was sweating and clammy. Well? What happened? What about your father? What did you see? He sighed. A creature. He shook his head. You have to understand. There were legends. Old legends, older than the rock cairns out in the valley, older still than Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, than the old Injun chiefs and their shamans, the Apache, the Hopi, the Cherokee, and all them old tribes and First Peoples. They told tales, old stories about dark Injun magic, a deal made with the old spirits of blood sacrifice to gain power, old power, enough to fight each other and the Spaniards, and later the white men that came for their land and women. They called them. He paused. Grandfather took a deep breath and bodied forward into his tale. Across the fire, in the sky, the desert, the creek, the moon and the sun, the old mountains, he bodied forward. They called them Skinwalkers, shape changers, old warriors resurrected as skinless men, all sinew and muscle, walking on deer legs with the torso of a man and the head of a coyote. But messed up, boy. Long and malformed snouts, teeth like a bowie knife, long arms and standing 7 foot, even hunched over. They'd gut the old cowboys and white riders. They'd run through bullets and sabers, part the Spanish armor like it was a potato sack. Willie, too. They could change their voice to match a person you knew or might know. Boy, that's what I saw. Big and fast. Only for a second it ran across the road. Gray and mottled. Muscle flexing under its legs, hooves clomping on the road, stringy, muscled, hunched shoulders. And it turned, looked right into the cab, looked right into my eyes. And I swear, boy, it grinned at me. I sank into my seat, in shock, in fear, shaking. I knew death was near. The air was electric. I smelled ozone and brimstone. The air felt like right before lightning comes and blows a tree to smithereens, charged and full of power. I yelled for my pa, but no words came out, just a dry squeak. I was shaken as grandfather told his story. He was still here, so I know he lived, but the supernatural always fascinated me. And even now, I felt the force of his words. The real power of skinwalkers was trickery. Sure, they could change their voices, but also their skin. That's why the gods took their hide, so they could take others. Not for long, the legend says, maybe an hour, before the soul of the skin they wore would come looking for their mortal shell before going to whatever hell awaited them. Though I think that getting skinned alive was hell enough. A minute passed in what felt like a lifetime, 1 second in 1,000 years. My father's door opened, and I jerked my head to the left, putting my fist up to fend off attack. "Son, it's me," my father said. Before climbing into the cab, he grasped the steering wheel and pulled himself in awkwardly, jerking himself into the seat. I cringed into the corner. I looked at him. I looked hard. "Boy, your great-grandfather was a good man. Treated me and my ma right. He fought and saw the worst of man in Poland when he freed 'em all camps. And now I was taking his measure. Is this my father? Do I make a run or do I die? Is it him or not? Let's go get that medicine for your ma," as he pulled the truck into gear and pulled it out onto the road, and our trip resumed. I guess it was him after all. But how did you know? Was it because he said something about your mom? No, boy. I knew because out the window, out the corner of my eye, I seen the beast running 50 miles an hour right next to the car, looking at me with them yellow eyes and grinning mouth. I looked at it and saw it, hunched and angry, running next to us, boy. My pa kept his eyes on the road, locked straight forward. "Son," he said, "don't look at it. Don't look at it." That's how I knew, boy. I'm a Marine stationed at Camp Pendleton. I met a skinwalker in the dirt fields. Being assigned to Camp Pendleton was a dream come true, located in Oceanside, northern San Diego. It's one of the biggest Marine Corps bases in the US. There's a ton of stuff to do nearby, whether it's going to the beach to surf, swim, or go for drinks at the pier. The people around here are mellow, and there's a surfer sort of vibe to the neighborhood I moved into. Everything was going great for me the first few weeks while I was here, but I noticed that despite the laid-back attitude of the surrounding area where I lived, my work life was rigid and inflexible. My commanding officer gruff and no nonsense. I began to realize this place was not going to be a catwalk. Then, one cool night, I woke up disoriented and far from my bed. Looking around, I saw there was nothing nearby. Not another person for miles. Just flat, dirt ground with hills in the distance, and the black sky full of stars and a full moon above. I must have been sleepwalking, I thought to myself, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. I had been marching in my dreams while remembering my days of basic training, and I somehow ended up in the middle of the dirt field. I looked around in every direction and finally saw lights in the distance behind me. At least I had an idea which way to go now. Turning around, I started to walk back towards the base, my legs wobbly from the long walk while asleep. It felt surreal to be out there in the middle of the night, and I didn't understand how it could have happened. I'd been caught sleepwalking once or twice before, but I'd never gone anywhere near to this far. Part of me wondered with a paranoid fear just how often this happens without me realizing it. I walked for a few minutes alone, feeling an increasingly strange sensation like a tingling on the back of my neck. After a while, I began to suspect it was that outdated lizard brain notion that someone was following me. A remnant from some bygone era where humans actually had to worry about being stalked in the night. Just as I had that thought, someone cleared their throat in the darkness behind me. A chill ran up my spine, and my flesh broke out in these goose pimples as he spoke. This voice deep, gruff, and commanding. "What are you doing here, all the way out here so late at night?" he asked. He stepped closer, and in the moonlight, I could see him more clearly. My voice caught in my throat as I looked at his eyes and saw they were yellow, like a cat or a wolf or a snake maybe. "Haven't you been told to stay in your bunk at this hour?" His tone was predatory and overwhelmingly creepy, but his demeanor was otherwise friendly. The part of my brain telling me to run was suddenly being hushed into submission by an unfamiliar voice which told me that this was fine, and not to worry about a thing. "Look at his uniform," the voice said, and sure enough I looked down to see he was wearing a Marine Corps uniform, with the insignia indicating he was an officer. "You wouldn't want to disrespect a superior officer, would you?" the voice asked. "Sorry, sir, I must have been sleepwalking. I'm just heading back towards the base. I can make it home from here." He showed his teeth in a grin and told me he'd walk with me for a stretch. "We must be distant relatives from somewhere down the line," he said as I walked. "Both of us out here walking in the middle of the night. I wish I could chalk up my trip to some somnambulism, but I'm just a run-of-the-mill insomniac. I could never get back to sleep once I'm up. I usually just go out for a long hike. It reminds me of the old days when I was deployed, I guess. Going for long marches that started before sunrise and didn't end until long past noon. The more time that went by, the more guilty I felt for having almost run from the man. He was just an ordinary guy. After the conversation became easier as we built up a rapport, and I told him about my life and my background and where I was from. When I looked back at his face, I was shocked by what I saw. Maybe there really was a family connection between the two of us. In the increasing light from the base as we drew closer to it, I saw there was a striking resemblance between us. He didn't look like that when you first saw him, that suspicious voice in my mind said uneasily. His eyes were yellow, remember? And now look at them. They're brown. But it was quickly drowned out by that other, louder voice which spoke up and said all this was okay too. It was just dark out in the dirt field, and I hadn't gotten a clear look at his face until now. "Tell me more about your parents," he said. "I want to know all about them. What are they like?" I started speaking again, feeling hypnotized as I looked into the older man's swirling brown eyes. He was walking slower and slower, and I was matching his pace. The base was close now. I could see the lights of it were very bright up ahead, less than a couple 100 yards away, but they were getting dimmer suddenly. The light was fading. But how? Were we walking backwards now? Was I even walking at all? Or was something dragging me now? It took a few moments to shake the strange sleepwalker's haze from my vision, and I realized I had been in a trance of sorts. When I looked at the man's face again through my half-closed eyes, I was astonished at what I saw. He didn't just bear a passing resemblance to me. He could have been my long-lost twin brother. His eyes were the same shade of brown, his hair close-cropped and chestnut. His jaw was defined and his nose was sharp and angular, but his smile and his teeth, those were not like mine at all. They were pointed and long, designed for tearing flesh from bone and ripping it to shreds. He He was pulling me, dragging me across the dirt deeper into the darkness again. "Who are you?" I heard myself asking, and in that second he changed completely. It wasn't like a horror movie when you see a man turn into a werewolf over a matter of a few minutes. The metamorphosis was not slow and drawn out. Instead, it happened in a split second. I blinked and the man who looked like me was no longer there. In his place was an indescribable monster, tall with long limbs, pale gray skin, and pitch black eyes. Its jaw unhinged as it revealed teeth longer and sharper than those belonging to a wolf or bear. It reminded me of that strange, ethereal white masked creature from Spirited Away, full of hate and hunger and waiting to consume everything. It didn't appear solid. This thing looked like it was made of shadows. A shot was fired suddenly, bringing me out of my hypnotized stupor. I realized that I was being dragged away from the base. The creature had my shoulder between its jaw and it was biting down so hard I could feel its grating against the bone. Another shot rang out, and as I heard a few people yelling. There were footsteps and I heard someone approaching behind me. The thing tried to pick me up in its jaws, and it was so massive and so strong that it actually succeeded momentarily. I thrashed and punched it in its face, kicking it in the eyes. My shoulder was on fire and my entire arm felt like it was dangling by a thread, as if it would pop off at any second, unhinging at the joint like a Thanksgiving turkey drumstick. And then for a second I thought it would. It popped out of socket and dislocated. The flesh began to rip and tear and bleed. The creature nearly tore my arm clean off as another shot rang out. I gave it one more good, hard kick to the face, and the already wounded monster dropped me to the ground, letting out a low moan of pain. It fell, its form turning into a dark black puddle of darkness like an oil spill, before skittering off into the night like an infinitely long centipede. It blended in perfectly with the shadows. It was gone a second later. Just as a few other Marines arrived. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, helping me to my feet. "Man, I never thought I'd live to see someone get attacked by a mountain lion. You're lucky to be alive." It took me a few seconds to comprehend what he was saying. It was so bizarre. The thing which had just attacked me looked nothing like a mountain lion. It was long and tall and humanoid with a black, wispy shroud surrounding it like a living cloak. "Man, are you blind?" the other Marine asked. "That wasn't a mountain lion." I breathed a sigh of relief. I wasn't crazy. Someone else had seen the thing as well. It was a wolf, a big gray wolf. Man, I've never seen one so big. You sure are lucky to be alive though, that's for sure. "Do you want us to call for an ambulance?" I shook my head. "No, I'll be fine. I can walk." I took a nervous look at both of them, as if judging for myself again whether they were human or not. But I decided these two were the real McCoy. If not for them, I would have been that thing's dinner. The two of them walked me back towards the base, and I tried to decide whether I should tell them the truth of what I had really seen, but with each step we took, the memory started seeming more and more surreal and dreamlike, to the point where I even started to convince myself I had exaggerated what happened. Maybe it was a mountain lion, or a gray wolf, far from its pack, desperate for food. But no, the memories could have been wiped away, but the teeth marks were not. They were strange and totally unlike anything a wolf or a mountain lion might leave. When I went to the infirmary to get the bites looked at, they told me they'd never seen anything like them before. After several sets of blood cultures and antibiotics, they never did figure out what was wrong with me, or how to get rid of my symptoms, sleepwalking being primarily among them. I would get up from my hospital bed in the night, and it would take a whole team of security guards to get me back into my room. So desperate I was to escape back to the fields, I told the men I needed to get back to the dirt fields, to march. All they could do was watch as my symptoms got worse, and as black, vein-like formations began to spread from the bite wounds, like a dark plague spreading throughout my body. Everything is so cold now, and I feel like I'm losing control. I don't want to feel like this, but I can't help it. Whatever bit me, it infected me. Its contagion is spreading throughout my system, and I can no longer fight it. I get these windows of time when I'm with it enough to speak and live my life, and then I get a period of darkness where I remember nothing. They discharged me recently, leaving me alone to deal with the symptoms myself. I think they're worried about having me so close to the base. They don't know what I'm capable of anymore. Most nights I wake up far from home and don't know how I got there. Just like that night in the dirt field. Like I'm sleepwalking all over again. Except that's not what this is. This is something much worse. The dark veins are spreading up towards my neck, towards my face, making me stand out and look strange. People think they're bizarre facial tattoos, inching their way towards my skull. They keep asking me if I'm alright. as sweat pours down my reddened face and eyes dart around with nervous paranoia. The blackouts are getting longer and closer together. I don't know how much longer I have left to be me. I'm terrified of what's going to happen when those veins get to my heart and my mind. Who knows how long I have left before I'm out roaming the dirt fields looking for a meal. I think I encountered a skinwalker. I have no evidence, but I promise you all this story is real. Sorry for the wall of text. I've always been a bit of a skeptic ever since I was a kid. Scary stories didn't faze me. Horror games never frightened me. And whenever I hear something weird at night, I instantly assume it's something normal, an animal, or just the house settling. Despite this, something very unsettling happened to me the other day, and I'm not really sure what to make of it. I think it's the first time in years I've been genuinely frightened. I live in a forested area in the US. Me and my girlfriend live in a large cabin, and although there are roads nearby, our nearest neighbors are at least a kilometer away. We also have 2 cats, one of which sleeps in the bedroom with us, whilst the other goes out at night and does whatever cats do when they're out of sight. Anyway, I like to stay up late at night and sleep late into the mornings, whereas my girlfriend's an early bird. It was about 1 in the morning and I was watching crappy TV in the living room while my girlfriend slept in the bedroom. I was beginning to grow tired when I heard something outside near the cat flap. For clarity, our cat flap uses an electronic chip, so only our cats can use it. I assumed it was just one of the cats coming in or leaving the house, and I just ignored it. Then I heard it again. It sounded like something thudding against the flat. It happened several times at random intervals, until I lost my patience and decided to just go and open the door. Clearly the cat was having trouble getting in. I never thought about it at the time, but this was weird because we fed our cats well, and they're very lean rather than chubby. I passed the bedroom and peered in as I walked by to see if my girlfriend heard the noises. She was fast asleep, but the cat that sleeps with us was staring at the window. I called her name. Nothing. She kept staring. I shrugged it off and kept heading towards the kitchen. The back door through here, by the way. Anyway, so I reached the back door and saw a dark shape through the translucent flap. I sighed, expecting the cat to be out there, and opened the door. It took me a moment to open the door, and I saw the cat tense up as I opened the door. The door opened fully. I froze. It wasn't my cat. Whatever it was had started moving before I opened it up, and I only caught a glimpse of the distorted figure, kind of like a tailless dog, bolting, and I mean absolutely pelting it. I freaked out and slammed the door shut. What the hell was it? I wasn't sure. My natural skepticism kicked in, and I assumed it was just my other cat, and I merely startled it. Perhaps the darkness had made it appear larger. Nevertheless, I was creeped out and decided to go to sleep. As I slipped into bed, I realized something horrifying. The second cat was asleep on the rug. It took me a while to get to sleep that night. Everything seemed normal until a few hours later. I woke to a strange feeling of dread. Something wasn't right. My girlfriend was fast asleep. I held my breath and heard something creaking by the door. It sounded too loud to be one of the cats. It was as if a person was walking about. I reached towards my bedside cabinet and flicked on the lamp. The room was illuminated, and I saw something standing just outside the open door, staring at me. The same twisted figure I had spotted outside earlier. It wasn't very tall, maybe a little over 5 feet, but it was just a face that stared at me the most. I only caught a glimpse of it. But what I saw will stay with me forever. It looked like a dog, but with an elongated face and almost human-like eyes. You know that weird distorted snarl hounds pull when they're pissed off? It had that expression. I instantly started yelling profanities as I scrabbled backwards, trying to straighten up. The creature turned and sprinted down the hall. I heard it dash outside and go past the window behind us, just above the headboard. I managed to look out as my girlfriend started to panic as she woke up fully. We both caught a glimpse of whatever the hell this thing was, as it dashed off into the woods near our home. Grabbing my trusty shotgun from beneath the bed, as well as a couple rounds from the ammunition box that sits next to it, I ran out of the room in my underwear and rounded into the kitchen. The door was open. I'd forgotten to lock it when I saw that thing originally. I hadn't seen it since, and we still live in our cabin. But I've bought sturdy locks for all the main doors and windows in our house, and always check the exit points at night. I also go to bed a bit earlier than I used to, so I'm asleep when the freaks of the night start to wake up. I've read a bunch of forums, and the only thing I can compare it to, based on what I saw, is a skinwalker. If you know anything about these things, please let me know. Skinwalker in the woods. I live right next to a Navajo reservation, and I've made friends with many people there my age. We like to hang out, play video games, and just be normal teens. I walk over a lot since my best friend lives a little less than a mile away from me. This isn't a long trek and usually only takes me about 25 to 30 minutes. I've made this trip dozens of times and I've grown very comfortable with it. I know the people along the way, so I'm not scared or on edge. There is a patch of forest, however, about midway there. It's a little unnerving sometimes. There's always the feeling of being watched. This was a regular occurrence for me, so I tried to just ignore it and shake it off as my mind playing tricks on me. This day I spent more time at my friend's house than I meant to, and when I left, it was already getting dark. I reached the stretch of forest right as the sun disappeared from the sky. I shivered a little as I readied myself to begin the journey through. I was 10 steps in when I heard a branch snap. You know the sound, the one that screams there is definitely someone or something there with you. I froze, not sure of what I should do next. Should I run? Should I turn around and book it back to my friend's house? I didn't know what the best option is in this situation. I whispered, "Hello?" Hearing my voice crack as the words fell from my lips. I don't know why I even opened my mouth, but I was out there, so I listened for any reply. My heart sank when the answer came back in the sound of my voice. "Hello?" I started to breathe too fast. My heart pounded against my chest. I felt like I might faint. "Hello?" My voice came again, but not from my mouth. I wanted to run, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. I couldn't scream. I couldn't reply, as my voice echoed over and over from a short distance away. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It sounded like it was everywhere around me. "Hello? Hello, hello?" It repeated. "Stop it!" I finally managed to tear from my lips. Everything went silent. For a long minute, nothing happened. The air grew stale, and I realized for the first time that there were no typical forest sounds. There are no bugs, no frogs, or crickets. Nothing. I stood there terrified, waiting to see what would happen next. "Stop it," it mimicked back. I'd had enough and was willing to heavy legs to move. Before I could take a step, I heard rustling in the bushes 20 feet to my left. I watched in horror as a deer head with huge antlers protruded through the brush. As it came further and stood up on all twos, I took off. I flew out of those woods and all the way home in record time. I said nothing to my mom when I got there. I just went up to my room, laid down, and thought about what happened. My mother came in at some point and asked me if everything was all right. I replied with that yes, I was just tired. I don't know why I didn't tell her. I guess I might have been afraid of how she would react. I called my friend and told him everything. He freaked out and told me, no matter what happened that night, to not reply or look out my window. This terrified me even more. He said to call him the next morning and he would explain more. And that he had to speak to his grandfather as soon as possible. That night I didn't sleep. At all. I stayed awake listening to every little sound the night brought. Around 3 a.m., just as I was about to drift off, the air changed. The night sounds quieted. I felt my heart begin to pound. I lay there and waited, pulling the covers up over my head like a child, far too scared to move. It came after a long moment. "Hello?" I cried. It was all I could do. "Hello?" "Stop it." It mocked what I had said in the woods again. It was terrifying enough when it copied what I said, but then it did something new. It called my name. "Amy." My mother's voice. "Amy, Amy, come here." "Hello?" "Stop it." My voice again. For the rest of the night, the creature outside my window called my name in my mother's voice and repeated what I said in the woods over and over. In the morning, when the sun broke through the dark, it finally stopped. I fell into a fitful sleep. I woke around 12 to my friend calling to tell me he had spoken to his grandfather and could explain what happened to me. He said there was a creature they called Yi Nadalushi, he who goes on all fours, or a skinwalker. He explained that it was an evil witch that used dark magic to transform into an animal with the attributes it required, and that it had caught my scent and knew me now. I was also given a warning that since it knew me, it would always follow me, that I would always have to be careful. Last night I heard scratching on my window, then a low hum. The creature began saying my name again, and also adding in things I hadn't said, in my mother's voice. At one point it started calling my name, but drawing it out really far like, "Amy." It tried to get me to come outside, or to open the door and let it in my house. This went on all night. At this point, I felt like I'm going crazy. I don't know what to do. Is it seriously going to stalk the shadows around me for the rest of my life? I don't think I can take that. Don't visit the Appalachians. I don't like to use the term Skinwalker to describe the hellspawn that wander the Appalachian Mountains. I say this because the only people that believe in Skinwalkers are the ones who have actually seen them. I sure as hell didn't believe in any such thing until about 2 weeks ago. The Appalachian Mountains had always been a place that I wanted to visit. The pictures on Google were enough for me. The place is fucking beautiful. I'd heard a few stories about skinwalkers roaming around the mountains during the night, which just made it all the more interesting. So I saved up some money, rented a cabin, and flew out here to experience the mountain lifestyle for a couple of weeks. The first few days were completely normal. I got settled in and felt completely fine. Hiking some surrounding trails is all that I can recall for the first 3 or 4 days. It was on that 5th day that everything began going to shit. The cabin that I had rented had 2 big floodlights facing the backyard. Every night a coyote would walk past my cabin, causing the lights to turn on. I thought nothing of it. It was honestly kind of cute. On the 5th night of my stay, I was sitting in the living room watching some satellite TV. In the corner of my eye, I saw the floodlights flicker on. I jumped up to go to see my new coyote friend through the window. Let's just say that whatever caused my floodlights to turn on that night was not a fucking coyote. Its body looked normal, except for the legs. The legs were extremely long and skinny, probably 3 times longer than any normal coyote. The thing just stared at me. My fight or flight didn't kick in. All I could do was stare back into its empty eyes. This creature then let out the loudest, most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard, then got even closer to the window. I turned around to grab my phone so I could call the police. As I was walking to the couch, the floodlights turned off. The soft glow of the old TV screen was the only light in the living room. I grabbed my phone and sprinted upstairs to my room. My first instinct was to hide in the closet, so I did just that. The closet doors had little slits in them so I could kind of see what was going on outside. I picked up my phone and tried to call the police. There was one slight problem though. My phone was dead. It was around this point that I heard knocking coming from my front door. The knocking continued for what felt like an hour. I literally had no idea what to do, so I just sat there, hoping that it would stop. It eventually did stop, but shortly after, I heard the door open. No kicking the door in or anything. It just opened. I started to cry. I could hear faint footsteps getting louder and faster as it went up the stairs. It eventually got to my room, where I thought I was dead for sure. I could hear it opening drawers and messing with my bed sheets. I peered through one of the slits in the door, but I couldn't really see anything. That was, until the creature put its disgusting, rotting face right up against the door. It was breathing so loudly that it was hurting my ears. I pushed myself back into a corner and used one of my jackets to cover me. It was my last option. I didn't know how long I sat there, but it felt like an eternity. I eventually peeked out from behind my jacket to see some light coming through the doors. I stood up and looked out. It was daytime. I couldn't hear the creature anymore. I assumed that it got spooked by the sunlight and left. I slowly opened my closet door. It was finally safe. Needless to say, I got the fuck out of there. I'm never going again. I don't want to see a therapist because they won't believe me. They'll think I'm insane. Maybe I am insane, I don't know. All I know is that whatever the locals of the Appalachian Mountains talk about these things, they aren't lying. Skinwalker stories from the past. This is a story my family told me when I was growing up. We live in a rural community on the Navajo reservation. My aunts and her 2 brothers were home alone while my grandparents had left for the evening to attend a chapter house meeting. They were in the house, and like many people from the reservation, they didn't have electricity. It had been dark outside for an hour, and my aunt and my uncles were getting ready for bed. Outside they heard noises, as if someone was moving things around outside. My oldest uncle went to look out the front window and saw a figure out by the truck. This was immensely out of the ordinary because the closest neighbor was miles away. Whatever it was opened the truck door and began to dig through the personal items that my family had left in the vehicle. My aunt and uncles were frightened by the sight and knew that they should have taken action. They took out the rifle and all steadied themselves to hold it up. They flung open the door and aimed the gun at the figure. The figure turned and started to walk towards them, totally unfazed by the weapon. My uncle pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The figure drew closer, and my aunt began to smell something like a rotting corpse. It was so strong it made her gag. My uncle continued to pull the trigger with no luck, and the figure came closer and closer. Off in the distance, headlights were coming up the road. My grandparents were returning. The figure looked towards the light and started to move away and tucked itself behind a tree near the house. My oldest uncle ran towards the truck with a weapon. My grandfather ran into the house and over to the stove and grabbed a handful of ashes and rubbed over the gun and placed an ash-covered bullet into the chamber. He walked out into the porch and fired towards the tree. Whatever that thing was, didn't expect the gun to go off. The gunshot echoed and the dark figure began running. My grandma chased my aunt inside and my uncles and my grandfather went after it. There weren't many roads or paths, so as my grandfather and uncles chased after the figure, the truck was bouncing and the headlights were not fixed on one particular spot. My uncle swears that when even the headlights would hit the figure, he saw a woman. Not only that, whoever it was running on all fours like a bear. My grandfather eventually stopped the truck, and as they neared the ditch that drops about 20 feet, he got out and began to yell in Navajo. My uncle says he was yelling about a local woman. He yelled that he wasn't scared and that he knew it was her and to leave his family alone. A few days passed and there was news that the woman that my grandfather was yelling about had passed. I've always been told that if you know who the Skinwalker is, say their name and it will kill them. And alright guys, that was Reddit Skinwalker Encounters Volume 2. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'm always down to make a Volume 3 for this if you guys really enjoy the Skinwalkers stories and want more of them. But let me know what you thought about this video down below in the comments, and let me know if you liked the video or you didn't. Leave a like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a ton. And thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. And yeah, once again, thank you guys so much for watching. And alright, until next time, see ya.